It started with a Tuesday. Isn't that always the way? The world ends on a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. My name is Leo. Leo Miller. I guess, a structural engineer. I build things that stay up. Bridges, support beams, load-bearing walls. I like things you can count on. Things with blueprints. If you have the plans, you know exactly what you're getting. The weight it can hold, the pressure it can withstand. I applied that principle to my life. Or, I tried to. My life, before it all went to hell, looked like a stock photo for contented urban professional. We lived in a condo in one of those new developments. You know the type. Beige walls, stainless steel appliances, a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs, and a dying basil plant. It smelled like lemon cleaning spray and the faint, always-there scent of the Thai place downstairs. Our home. Mine and Clara's. Clara. My wife. Was my wife. She worked in, she said she worked in client relations for a small marketing firm. It sounded vague but plausible. She'd leave at 8:30 sharp. She wore these elegant, understated blouses and pencil skirts, sensible heels. She carried a sleek leather laptop bag. She looked the part. She was the part. At least, that's what I believed for 7 years. Our routine was a metronome. Coffee at 7 o'clock, news on low volume, a kiss goodbye that tasted of mint toothpaste. She'd work late sometimes or have client dinners. I never questioned it. Why would I? I had my own deadlines, my own stress. The quiet hum of our life was the soundtrack I'd always wanted. After the chaos of my childhood, it was a sanctuary. But the cracks, you look back and you see them. Little hairline fractures in the foundation. The way she'd sometimes flinch if I touched her phone, even though it was just to hand it to her. Oh, thanks, honey. Battery's almost dead. She said that a lot. The battery was always almost dead. She had a separate old laptop she used for freelance work. It was always in her tote bag. Just some graphic design stuff, Leo. Helps with the extras. Extras like our vacation to Crete last year. I joked, "You must be great at client relations." And she just smiled, a tight little smile that didn't reach her eyes. You have no idea. There were other things. She was incredibly fit. Yoga, she said. 5 times a week. She'd come home limber, serene, smelling of sandalwood and sweat. She had a small, delicate tattoo on her hip, a crescent moon. I'd never seen her get it. Did it on a girls' trip, years ago? She'd shrugged. You were so busy with that bridge project you probably didn't notice. And I believed her. Because I had been busy. Because it was easier. The biggest crack, the one I should have paid attention to, was her eyes. Clara had the most amazing eyes. Hazel, but they changed with the light. In our kitchen they were warm, like honey. But sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, they'd go flat, distant, like she'd checked out and someone else was piloting the body. I'd catch it and my stomach would do a little flip. "You okay?" I'd ask. And she'd blink, and the warmth would flood back. "Just tired, Leo. Long day at the office." And I'd let it go. Every single time. The divorce, it didn't start with a bang. It started with a slow, cold seep. We stopped talking. We said words. "Pass the salt. The cable bill is due." But we stopped talking. The silence in the condo grew thicker, heavier than any steel beam I had ever calculated. It pressed down on us. We became 2 satellites in the same sterile orbit, passing in the hallway, brushing teeth side by side in the mirror, strangers sharing a bed. I suggested couples therapy. She said she'd think about it. Then, one night, over a dinner of silently eaten salmon, she put her fork down. It made a tiny, definitive clink on the porcelain. "Leo," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "This isn't working. My perfectly calculated life, my load-bearing walls, they were made of paper. We had the talk. The quiet, devastating talk about separation, about how we'd grown apart. No screaming, no thrown plates. Just a mutual, exhausted surrender. It was almost worse that way. If she'd hated me, I could have fought. But she just didn't want me anymore. She wanted out of the stock photo. We agreed to be civil, practical. We'd divide assets, sell the condo. She hired a lawyer. I hired a lawyer. It was all very adult, very clean. That's what I told myself. We were being mature. My lawyer, a brisk woman named Diane with a perpetually raised eyebrow, told me I needed to get a full picture of our finances. For the settlement, Leo, we need to know what she has, what she earns. She claims a modest salary, but her spending suggests otherwise. That Crete vacation, the designer handbag I saw in the closet photos, get me everything. Bank statements, tax returns, investment portfolios, the works. So that's how I ended up in my home office on a Tuesday evening with a knot in my stomach. Clara was out. Yoga, she said. The condo was silent except for the hum of my computer. I had all our shared documents in a fireproof box. I dragged it onto the desk. The key was on my key ring, next to the fob for the parking garage. It felt like a betrayal turning that little key. But Diane said it was standard. Necessary. I went through the usual stuff. Mortgage papers. My pension plan. Our joint account statements. Everything was orderly, predictable. Then I found her box. A smaller, gray lockbox I'd seen her use for her important documents. It was locked with a combination, not a key. I stared at it. This was the line. Opening the shared box was one thing. This was hers. But Diane's voice was in my head. We need a full picture, Leo. I tried birthdays, our anniversary, her old college dorm number. Nothing. I sat back, frustrated. Then I remembered something stupid. The code for the gym locker she'd used years ago, when we first met. 172305. Our first date was May 23rd. She was 17 when she lost her. No, not important. I dialed the numbers. 172305. The latch clicked open. My heart was hammering against my ribs. You know that feeling? When you know you're about to see something you can't unsee? I almost slammed it shut. I should have. God, I should have. I didn't. Inside, there were no stock certificates or secret wills. There was a passport. I flipped it open. It was Clara's photo, but the name was Chloe Marsh. The birthday was different. Off by 2 years. I stared at her smiling face, the face I'd kissed 1,000 times, under a name I didn't know. Underneath the passport was a stack of bank books. Not from our local credit union. From an offshore bank in the Caymans. I opened one. The balances made my eyes water. Numbers with more commas than my engineering degree had prepared me for. And then, at the very bottom, was a plain black USB drive. It was small, cold. It felt heavy in my hand. This was it. The source code. The real blueprint. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it twice before I got it into my laptop port. A window popped up. One folder. It was named, simply, Archive. I double-clicked. It wasn't financial spreadsheets. It was video files. Hundreds of them. Thumbnails loaded, a grid of tiny blurry images. My brain couldn't process it at first. It was just color and shape. I leaned closer, squinting. And then I saw her. It was Clara, but not my Clara. This Clara had hair a shade too blonde, makeup a touch too sharp. She was wearing not much. And she wasn't alone. The thumbnail was small, but the scene was unmistakable. It was a professional shot. Studio lighting. A backdrop. My breath left my body in a rush, like I'd been punched. I felt dizzy. I clicked on one at random. The video player opened. It was silent for a second, then audio fuzzed to life. A man's voice, off camera, giving a direction. And then her voice, Clara's voice, but lower. Husky, a voice she'd never used with me. She laughed. It was a sound I'd never heard. It was empty. A performance. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound was violent in the quiet room. I sat there in the dark, the only light from the street lamp outside slicing through the blinds. The smell of lemon cleaner was suddenly suffocating. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. Client relations, yoga, freelance work, the separate laptop, the dead phone battery, the flatness in her eyes, the money. Chloe Marsh. 7 years. 7 years of my life, my love, my trust. It was all a set, a convincingly constructed set. I was living in a film, and I hadn't even known I was an actor. The condo, the routine, the marriage, it was all just a backdrop for her other life. A life that paid for the beige walls and the stainless steel and the trips to Crete. The door downstairs clicked open. Her key in the lock. Her footsteps on the stairs. Light, familiar. The yoga bag rustling. She was home. I was still sitting in the dark, her secret box open on the desk in front of me, the USB drive sticking out of my closed laptop like a poisoned thorn. The evidence of a 7-year lie was spread out before me, glowing in the street lamp's grim light. Her footsteps reached the top of the stairs. She paused. She could see the light from my office under the door. "Leo," she called. Her voice was normal, tired from her class. "You in there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth was desert dry. I heard her walk towards the door. Her hand touched the knob. What do you do when the person you shared your life with is a complete stranger? What do you say when the foundation of your entire world wasn't just cracked, it was never even there to begin with? The knob began to turn. The knob turned, and the door swung open slowly. She flipped the light switch. The sudden fluorescent glare was an assault. I blinked, my eyes burning. But I didn't move. I just sat there, a statue carved from pure, cold shock, with her lies laid bare on the desk between us. For a second, she just stood in the doorway, her yoga mat still slung over her shoulder. She was in her leggings and a tight tank top, her skin glowing with a fine sheen of sweat. Sandalwood. She always smelled of sandalwood after class. Now the scent made my stomach clench. Her gaze traveled from my face, frozen in a mask I couldn't even feel, down to the open lockbox, to the passport splayed open like a wounded bird, to the bank books with their obscene numbers, finally, to the USB drive, that little black shard of truth sticking out of my laptop. I watched her face. I was an engineer. I observed failure points. I saw the exact moment her own facade, the one she wore for me, experienced a catastrophic structural collapse. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gasp, no hand flying to her mouth. It was a subtle, total draining. The serene post-yoga glow vanished, replaced by a pale, calculating stillness. The warmth in her hazel eyes evaporated, leaving behind something flat, hard, and utterly familiar, the same flatness I'd caught in glimpses for years. The pilot was back in the cockpit, and the autopilot of Clara, the wife, was switched off. "Leo," she said. Her voice wasn't the tired wife's voice from a moment ago. It was different, measured, neutral. It was the voice from the video. I found my own voice, but it didn't sound like mine. It was a rasp, scraped raw from the inside. Chloe Marsh, a flicker in her eyes. Annoyance? Not shame. Never shame. "You shouldn't have opened that." A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat, but it died before it could escape. "Shouldn't have, Clara. Or Chloe. What is this?" My hand gestured weakly at the desk. 7 years? Was any of it real? The marriage? Was that just another set? Another scene? She stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft, definitive click. The sound was a prison door slamming. She leaned against it, crossing her arms. She didn't look defensive. She looked assessed, like she was reevaluating a problem. "It was real enough," she said, her tone disturbingly conversational. "The marriage served a purpose. For both of us. You wanted stability. A quiet life. A blueprint. I provided the aesthetic?" "The aesthetic," I echoed, the word tasting like ash. "You provided a lie. A complete fucking fiction. Client relations? Yoga?" I spat the words out. "I do yoga," she shrugged, a small, infuriatingly elegant movement. "It's necessary for flexibility. And I do have clients. They're just particular about their relations." A cold, thin smile touched her lips. It was the smile from the thumbnail. The casualness of it was worse than any confession. It was an admission that didn't even feel like one. It was just a statement of fact. My mind, trained to solve for stress and load, was short-circuiting trying to process the sheer scale of the deception. It wasn't a single lie. It was an entire parallel life running alongside mine, funded by mine, using my love as a prop. The money, I choked out, pointing at the Cayman books. All of it? From that? It's a lucrative business, Leo. Far more than structural engineering. The freelance work paid for the extras? Kept things comfortable. You enjoyed Crete, didn't you? I felt vomit rise in my throat. The sun, the wine, her laughing in a white sundress. It was all tainted, paid for by that hollow laugh on my laptop screen. I saw the tattoo on her hip, the crescent moon. A branding, not a memory. Why? It was the only word left, a pathetic, broken sound. Why marry me? Why any of it? For the first time, a shadow of something like genuine emotion passed over her face. Not remorse, but a kind of impatient pity. You were safe, Leo. Predictable. You asked no questions. You were so wrapped up in your beams and your blueprints that you never looked too closely at mine. You were the perfect cover, a respectable husband. It normalized me. It made Chloe disappear into Clara. She uncrossed her arms and took a step toward the desk. I flinched, and she stopped, that cold smile returning. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. You got your sanctuary, I got mine. The arrogance of it stole my breath. My sanctuary was her camouflage. My love was her convenience. It's over, I whispered, but it sounded like a question. The marriage? She said, tilting her head. Yes, that was already over. This, she gestured at the box, just changes the terms of the divorce. The terms. Of course, to her, this was just a negotiation that had taken an unexpected turn. The human devastation was just a variable in the equation. I'll take this to my lawyer, I said, my voice gaining a shred of strength from the sheer, venomous anger starting to thaw the ice in my veins. This is fraud. This changes everything. The settlement. You won't get a cent. She laughed then. It was the same empty performative laugh from the video, and hearing it in my home office directed at me was a kind of psychological torture. Oh, Leo, my sweet, naive Leo, you think you can use this? Go ahead, take it to Diane, file it with the court. Your Honor, my wife is a porn star. And then what? The story leaks. It will leak. A salacious detail like that? It's gasoline. Your name, your reputation. Leo Miller, the engineer whose wife was Chloe Marsh, will be the only thing anyone remembers. Every future client, every colleague. They'll Google you, and that will be the first thing that comes up. Not your bridges. Not your integrity. This. She took another step, now close enough that I could see the fine, perfect pores on her skin, the faint smudge of mascara under her eyes. And what do you think they'll find if they dig into Chloe Marsh? It's not just studio work, Leo. The archive is comprehensive. High-end, powerful clients who value discretion above all else. Men who would be very, very unhappy to have their private entertainments become part of a messy public divorce. You'd be dragging more than my name through the mud. You'd be making dangerous enemies, the kind who don't send lawyer letters. Her words settled in the room like a toxic gas. It wasn't just a threat of embarrassment. It was a threat of ruin, and something darker, more implicit. She wasn't just an actress. She was a commodity in a world that operated in shadows, a world that protected its investments. You're threatening me? I breathed. I'm explaining reality, she corrected, her voice soft, almost gentle. The reality is, you keep this quiet. We proceed with our clean, civil adult divorce. You sign the papers agreeing to a fair split of our visible assets, the condo, the joint accounts. You let me walk away, and in return, you get to keep your life, your career, your dignity, such as it is. You get to pretend this. She tapped the lockbox with a manicured finger. Never happened. You can tell people we grew apart. It's even true, in a way. The sheer audacious neatness of it was breathtaking. She had engineered her own exit strategy, and my discovery hadn't altered it. It had just given her more leverage. I was trapped. If I fought, I'd be destroyed professionally and possibly worse. If I surrendered, I'd be living a second lie, paying for my own betrayal with my silence. I looked at her, this beautiful stranger I'd slept next to for 7 years. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the absolute absence of the love I'd believed was there. The final load-bearing wall in my psyche crumbled to dust. "Get out," I said, the words barely audible. "We need to discuss." "Get out!" I roared, slamming my fist on the desk. The lockbox jumped. The passport fluttered. "Get out of this room. Get out of this house. Now." She didn't startle. She just studied me for a long moment, as if confirming the breakdown of a specimen. Then she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll be at the Hilton. You have until the end of the week to be reasonable, Leo. Think about your bridges. They're all you have left." She turned and left, pulling the door shut behind her. I listened to her footsteps recede down the hall, heard the familiar sounds of her gathering a few things from the bedroom. Efficient, unhurried. The front door opened and closed. A final, soft click. Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full of ghosts. The ghost of her laugh, her kiss, her lies. I looked at the evidence on my desk. My proof. My poison. I pulled the USB drive from my laptop. It felt radioactive. I wanted to smash it, to burn it all. But I didn't. Because she was right. This wasn't just a secret about my wife. It was a landmine, and I was standing in the middle of the field. If I moved, if I told a soul, I'd trigger an explosion that would shatter my life into unrecognizable pieces. The men she spoke of? Were they the clients at those dinners? The ones with the power and the need for discretion? I opened my laptop again. I didn't open the videos. I couldn't. Instead, I opened a blank document. I started typing. Not a letter, not a confession. A list. A structural assessment of my own ruin. Item 1. Spouse is a professional sex worker and fraud. Item 2. Spouse has substantial hidden assets, Cayman Islands. Item 3. Spouse has alternate identity, Chloe Marsh. Item 4. Spouse has implied connections to dangerous individuals. B. Retaliation from unknown parties. C. Financial entanglement in unseen liabilities. The list was a cold, brutal blueprint of my powerlessness. The understanding didn't come as a shock. It seeped in, cold and heavy, like water filling a sinking ship. This wasn't a problem I could solve with calculations or honest labor. This was a game played in a different league, with rules I didn't know and weapons I couldn't comprehend. She hadn't just been lying to me. She had been building a life with a trap door under mine. And now, she'd opened it. I was falling, but the fall wasn't into grief or heartbreak anymore. It was into something colder, more terrifying. It was the realization that the divorce was the least of my problems. Getting out of this marriage cleanly, quietly, and with my life and career intact was now the only objective. And to do that, I had to let the woman who had dismantled my reality walk away with everything she wanted. The victory would be hers, the silence would be mine, and the secret, the immense rotting secret of Clara Chloe, would become a load I would have to bear alone. Forever, the invisible flaw in the foundation of whatever life I tried to build next. I closed the lockbox. The click of the latch was the sound of my own cage locking. I had until the end of the week to be reasonable, to surrender, to understand that sometimes the only way to survive a collapse is to stand very, very still and let the dust settle on top of you. The silence after the door clicked shut wasn't empty. It was a physical substance, thick and buzzing like the air after a transformer blows. I sat there for an hour, maybe 2. Time had lost its scaffolding. The street lamp's blade of light crept across the desk, illuminating the dust motes dancing over her lockbox. My proof. My coffin. Think about your bridges. Her words echoed, not as a plea, but as a cold engineering principle. A bridge under catastrophic stress has limited options. Redistribute the load, reinforce the failing member, or initiate a controlled demolition. There was no redistributing this. The load was all on me. Reinforcement was impossible. The material itself, my marriage, was proven defective. That left demolition. A controlled, silent, self-immolating demolition. I moved finally, my joints stiff with shock. I didn't touch the lockbox. I walked out of the office, through the living room that smelled of lemon and Thai food, and into the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, my hand trembling so badly the water sloshed over the rim. I drank it, staring at the two chairs on the balcony silhouetted against the city lights. Our chairs. I'd bought them at a flea market the first year. She'd laughed, saying they were wobbly. I'd spent a Sunday afternoon reinforcing the joints, sanding the rust off the frames. See? I'd said. Proud. Good as new. They'll last forever. She'd kissed me, and we'd sat in them, drinking cheap wine, watching the sunset. A perfect memory. Now, I wondered if she'd been thinking about a client, if her smile had been for me, or just practice. The nausea returned. A hot, sour wave. I made it to the sink and vomited, my body convulsing, trying to expel the poison of the last hour. It left me hollow, shaking, my forehead damp against the cool stainless steel. Stainless. Nothing was stainless, everything was corroded. I had to move. I couldn't stay in this set, this stage of our lie. I went to the bedroom. Her side of the closet was still full. The elegant blouses, the pencil skirts, the sensible heels, the costume of Clara. I yanked a duffel bag from the top shelf and started throwing my things into it. Jeans, t-shirts, socks. I avoided the bathroom, couldn't face the twin toothbrushes. I took my engineering textbooks, my laptop, the fireproof box with my real documents. I left everything that smelled like us. On my way out, I stopped at the office door. The lockbox sat there, accusing. I couldn't leave it. It was the only leverage I had, even if using it meant suicide. I emptied it, stuffing the passport, the bank books, and the USB drive into the inner pocket of my jacket. They felt like a tumor against my chest. I closed the empty box and left it on the desk, a hollow shell. I drove without destination. The city lights blurred into streaks of meaningless color. I ended up at a generic chain hotel near the airport, the kind of place designed for anonymity. The clerk didn't look up. The room smelled of stale air and industrial cleaner. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally the feeling came. It wasn't sadness, it was terror. A pure animal terror that started in my gut and radiated out until my fingers and toes were tingling with it. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The walls of the cheap room seemed to pulse inward. This was a panic attack. But it was more than that. It was the visceral understanding that my reality had been a fiction. If she was a lie, what else was? My job? My friends? My own mind? The terror of the unknown was bad, but the terror of the known being false was infinitely worse. I had built my life on a geological fault I never sensed. I fumbled for my phone. My thumb hovered over Diane's number. My lawyer. The brisk, logical voice of the law. I imagined saying the words out loud. Diane, my wife is a porn star named Chloe Marsh, with offshore accounts and dangerous clients. I heard the pause on the other end. The rustle of papers. The slow, careful recalibration. She'd believe me, eventually, with the evidence. And then she'd say exactly what Clara had said, but in legalese. The discovery process would be incendiary, Leo. The collateral damage to your reputation, your career, you must consider a settlement. She'd be on my side, but her side would be the side of pragmatic survival. She'd advise surrender. I couldn't call her. Not yet. Who then? My parents? They loved Clara. They'd be devastated. Then confused, then suspicious of every woman I ever brought home again. My friends? Mark from work. I pictured his face, the awkward pity, the barely concealed lurid curiosity. No way, Clara. Seriously? Which sites? My humiliation would be a story, a piece of gossip to be dissected over beers. I had no one. The isolation was absolute. For 7 years, Clara had been my primary confidant. She was the one I came home to, the one I shared the quiet victories and frustrations with. And she had been a recording device, a black box in human form, storing my vulnerabilities for God knows what purpose. I lay back on the scratchy bedspread, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling. The panic subsided, leaving behind a crushing fatigue and a single glaring headlight of a thought. I have to know. I had to know the scope of the lie. I had to see the full blueprint of my own ruin. It was masochistic, but it was also the only engineering principle I had left. To understand the failure, you must examine all the data, no matter how catastrophic. With a feeling of dread heavier than any physical weight, I pulled the USB drive from my jacket. I plugged it into my laptop, the familiar window popping up. The archive folder. This time, I didn't click randomly. I sorted by date. The oldest files were from over 8 years ago, before we met. I opened one. The production was less polished, but it was her. Younger, her hair darker, closer to its natural color. But the eyes were the same flat, performing eyes I'd seen in my office. Chloe Marsh was already a fully formed entity. Our entire relationship had been a sequel to this. I scrolled forward. The dates marched on, through our engagement, our wedding, our honeymoon in Maine. I found a file dated the week after we returned. My stomach turned to lead. I forced myself to open it. It was a different setting, a lavish modern apartment. She was there, laughing that laugh. With someone else. I clicked through, a ghost haunting my own life. There was a file from the night of my promotion party. 2 years in, I'd come home elated, tipsy, full of love and plans for the future. She'd listened, smiled, made love to me. According to the timestamp, she'd filmed for 3 hours the next afternoon. The yoga days, the client dinners. I started cross-referencing in my mind, building a sickening parallel calendar. The weekend I was at that engineering conference in Chicago. Multiple files. The Tuesday nights she had her advanced class, a steady, relentless output. But then I saw it. The pattern shifted about 3 years ago. The studio work, the more generic stuff, became less frequent. In its place were files with different naming conventions, not dates, but initials and codes. JM_private_session, DL_estate. The thumbnails showed different environments, hotel suites that screamed money, yachts, what looked like private clubs. The men in these, though often blurred or out of frame, carried an aura of power in their posture, in the cut of their suits, in the casual way they touched expensive objects. This was the high-end work she'd hinted at. This was the world of powerful clients who value discretion. I felt a new kind of chill, one that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with fear. These weren't just consumers, these were men who owned things, who were used to ownership. And Clara Chloe was a prized possession in their world. The final piece of the horror clicked into place when I found a folder simply titled Verification. Inside were scans, a diploma from a state university I'd never heard her mention, pay stubs from the marketing firm, perfectly forged, tax returns for Clara Miller that showed a modest, believable income. A whole life manufactured on paper with the same meticulous detail I applied to my structural schematics. She hadn't just been acting the part. She'd built the supporting documentation. I closed the laptop. The room was dark now. I'd been watching for hours, descending into a hell of my own making. I was broken, truly, fundamentally broken. The man who believed in blueprints, in calculable stress, in the integrity of materials, was gone. In his place was a raw, exposed nerve, pulsing with knowledge that felt like a disease. But in the wreckage, a strange, cold clarity emerged. The shock had passed. The panic had burned itself out. I was in the aftermath. And in the aftermath, you have to clear the debris. Clara was right about one thing. A public fight was suicide. Not just career suicide, but possibly literal. The men in those later videos, they weren't the kind you subpoena. They were the kind who made problems disappear. My problem? My knowledge was a loose end, and loose ends get trimmed. I had to let her go. I had to give her the clean divorce, the fair split of the visible assets. I had to sign the papers and walk away. It was the only way to survive. But a new thought, small and hard as a diamond, formed in the darkness. She doesn't get to keep everything. She got her freedom, she got her money, she got her secret intact. But I had the one thing she couldn't afford to have exposed. The truth. The USB drive was a weapon I could never fire, but she didn't know that. She thought she had me cornered, compliant. She expected the reasonable, predictable Leo. For the first time that night, I felt my lips twist into something that wasn't a smile. It was the grimace of a new creature being born from the ashes of the old one. The Leo who followed blueprints was dead. Someone else had to navigate this uncharted, treacherous ground. I got up, my body aching. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, a stranger looked back, pale, hollow-eyed, but with a sharp, focused glint that hadn't been there before. The glint of a man with nothing left to lose, but one thing left to do. I wouldn't fight her in court. That was her game, and the deck was stacked. I would do something else. I would pretend to capitulate. I would be the broken, defeated husband agreeing to her terms. I would sign whatever she put in front of me. But first, I would secure my own insurance. I took out the USB drive and the passport. I found a 24-hour FedEx office. I bought a small, sturdy lockbox. I put the drive and the passport inside. I didn't include the bank books. Those were just numbers, easily denied. The video and the identity were the core of the truth. I addressed the box to myself at a P.O. box I rented online using a fake company name and paid for with a prepaid debit card. I set the delivery date for 6 months in the future. I mailed it from a Dropbox across town. It was a time capsule of my own destruction. If anything happened to me, if I had an accident, if I disappeared, the box would arrive at the P.O. box. After a period of inactivity, it would be returned to the sender, which was a virtual mailbox service that would, according to my instructions, forward it to Diane, my lawyer, with a note. It was a dead man's switch, a silent, structural failsafe. I returned to the hotel as dawn was bleeding into the sky. I slept for 2 hours, a black, dreamless sleep. When I woke, the crushing weight was still there, but I could move under it. I had a path, a terrible, degrading path, but a path nonetheless. I picked up my phone. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice cool, expectant. "Leo." "I'll do it," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion I actually felt. I sounded convincingly broken. "Your terms." The clean split. "I'll tell Diane to stand down." There was a pause. I could almost hear her satisfaction, a silent exhalation of triumph. "I knew you'd be reasonable." "I want it done fast," I said. "I want out." "Of course," she replied, the professional now. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the amended agreement. You can sign by the end of the week." "Fine." I hung up. I sat on the bed, the phone in my hand. The act had begun. I would play the defeated man. I would grieve in public. I would let our friends pity me. I would take my half of the beige condo money and I would leave this city. I would start again somewhere, with the invisible, eternal load of the secret bending my spine. But in a warehouse somewhere, a lockbox was ticking. It was my only piece of leverage, my only shred of power in a game where I was otherwise a pawn. She had her archive, now I had mine. Mine was smaller. It contained only 2 things, the proof of who she was and the silent, patient promise that if she or her dangerous world ever came for me again, the truth would no longer be silent. It wasn't justice. It wasn't revenge. It was structural integrity of the most basic kind, the will to not completely disappear. The marriage was a lie. The love was a fiction. The life was a set. But I, in the ruins of it all, was still real. And I would somehow bear the load. The week that followed was a masterclass in performance. My life became a series of calculated gestures, each one designed to broadcast defeat. I moved back into the condo. It was easier. She'd taken a suite at the Hilton indefinitely, and I wore the emptiness like a uniform. I called Diane. I told her I'd found nothing of consequence in the lockbox, just some old financial records that checked out. I said I couldn't do a drawn-out fight. "I'm tired, Diane. I just want it over." I heard the disappointment in her pause, the suspicion that something was off, but I was the client. She drew up the papers according to Clara's terms, a clean, 50/50th split of the condo equity, the joint accounts, the car. No alimony, no further claims. It was a surrender document. I signed them in her lawyer's office, a space so sleek and quiet, it felt like a tomb. Clara was there, of course. She wore a charcoal gray suit, hair in a severe bun. She looked like a CEO closing a minor acquisition. Our eyes met across the polished table. I let mine be empty, hollow. The broken man. I saw the faintest flicker of confirmation in hers. Good, it seemed to say. You're being reasonable. We didn't speak. The pens scratched. The papers were shuffled. It was done in 20 minutes. As we stood to leave, her lawyer stepped out to get copies. For a moment, we were alone in the room. "You'll be okay, Leo," she said, her voice low, almost kind. It was the worst thing she could have said. It was pity from the architect of my ruin. I just nodded, looking at the floor. Yeah. I walked out of that building into a bland, sunny afternoon. The world hadn't ended. It had just become incredibly cheap and thin, like a stage set made of painted paper. I went through the motions. I packed the rest of my things. I sold my share of the condo furniture to a resale shop for pennies on the dollar. I couldn't bear any of it. I found a small furnished apartment across town, a box with beige walls that were a sickening echo of the life I'd left. I told my parents, my friends. I used the script. We grew apart. It's sad, but it's civil. They offered condolences, awkward pats on the back. They saw the shadows under my eyes, the weight I'd lost, and they attributed it to heartbreak. It was easier to let them believe that. The truth was a monster I kept chained in the dark, fed on silence. I went back to work. The bridge project was nearing completion. My colleagues were gently, excruciatingly supportive. "Hang in there, Leo." I'd nod, grateful, and bury myself in calculations. The numbers were my only refuge. They didn't lie. The stress on a steel cable under a specific load was a beautiful, honest thing. I clung to it. But every night, I returned to the silent box of my apartment. The terror had subsided into a constant low-grade hum of dread. It was the dread of the unknown, of the men in the blurred videos, of the world Clara inhabited. Had I been marked? Was I being watched? I started noticing things. A car that seemed to linger too long on my street. A wrong number call that was just heavy breathing. It was probably paranoia, but paranoia had become my most rational state of mind. I'd checked the dead man's Switch account online. It was dormant, ticking silently. My only piece of control. 2 months passed. The divorce was final. The money hit my account. I was free, and I felt like a ghost. I thought the worst was over. I thought the deal was done. I was wrong. It was a Thursday. I was working late at the office running a final simulation on the bridge's stress tolerances. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. Same number. A cold finger traced my spine. I answered. Leo Miller. It wasn't a question. The voice was male, calm, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the kind of voice used to giving orders that were never written down. Who is this? A friend of Chloe's. The name hung in the air between us like a poison gas. We need to talk about your recent discoveries and your future. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. The words automatic, brittle, the lockbox, Leo, the USB drive, the passport. We know you copied the data before you returned the originals to her. That was not part of the agreement. My blood turned to ice. How? She must have had the condo checked after I left. Forensic software on my old laptop, a hidden camera in the office. In her world, it was all possible. The feeling of being outmatched was absolute. There is no copy. I lied, my mouth dry. Let's not waste time. You have something that doesn't belong to you. You will give it to us. All of it. Every scrap. And then you will forget any of this ever happened. Or what? The question left my lips before I could stop it, a spark of defiance from the buried part of me that wasn't completely broken. The voice didn't change in tone, it remained pleasant, reasonable. Or, the very unfortunate story of your wife's double life becomes public, but not in the messy, scandalous way you feared. It will be tied to you. The narrative will be that you were her manager, her pimp, that you engineered her entire double life using your respectable career as cover. The evidence will be compelling. Emails from your computer, financial trails leading back to you. You'll be the villain, Leo, the calculating engineer who pimped out his own wife. You'll go to prison for a very long time, and no one will believe a word you say. The world tilted. This was the move I hadn't calculated. They weren't just threatening to expose her, they were threatening to frame me, to make me the architect of the very horror that had destroyed me. The sheer elegant cruelty of it took my breath away. They wouldn't just ruin me, they would erase me and replace me with a monster. "You can't do that," I whispered. "We already have. The pieces are in place. We simply need to decide whether to press go. The choice is yours. You can be the sad divorced engineer who moves on with his life, or you can be a convicted felon and a societal pariah. We'd prefer the former. It's cleaner." "What do you want?" The words were ash, the data, all of it, and a meeting to ensure we have your full cooperation and understanding. Tonight, 11 p.m., the old waterfront warehouse, Pier 17, south entrance. Come alone. Bring everything. If you involve anyone, or if we see so much as a shadow we don't like, the story goes live to every news desk in the city before you reach the door. The line went dead. I sat in my ergonomic office chair, in my modern office, surrounded by the blueprints of stability, and I felt the last vestige of the old Leo die. The man who believed in systems, in fairness, in the possibility of a clean exit. That man was gone. What was left was an animal backed into a corner with a dead man's switch as its only tooth. They knew about the copy, but they didn't know about the switch. They thought they had me in checkmate. They thought I was just a scared, broken civilian who would hand over the last shred of his dignity to avoid a worse fate. I looked at the bridge simulation on my screen, a complex web of forces, of tensions and countertensions. A structure designed to bear immense weight by channeling it, distributing it, turning pressure into strength. I wasn't a bridge. I was a single, failing beam. But even a beam, at the point of catastrophic failure, can dictate the nature of the collapse. I had until 11. I didn't go home. I went to a crowded downtown library. I used a public computer. I accessed the dead man's switch service. I didn't disarm it. I amended it. I uploaded a new file. A simple text document. It contained a name. Clara Miller, a.k.a. Chloe Marsh. A list of the offshore bank account numbers I'd memorized. The name of the law firm that had handled the divorce. And a single line. "If I am arrested or discredited, this is why." I set a new trigger. My arrest or the publication of any major news story linking me to criminal activity involving sex work. If triggered, it would send the contents, the text file, and the location of the safety deposit box key for the USB drive and passport to Diane, my lawyer, and to 3 major news outlets. It was a bluff on top of a bluff. A house of cards in a hurricane. But it was all I had. Then I went to the meeting. Pier 17 was a skeleton of rusted iron and rotting wood, jutting into the black, oily water of the industrial harbor. The south entrance was a yawning mouth of darkness. The city's lights were a distant, irrelevant glitter. I parked my car a mile away and walked, a duffel bag over my shoulder. In it was a cheap blank USB drive I'd bought on the way. My own fake. My performance. The warehouse was vast, echoing with the drip of water and the skittering of rats. The only light came from a single construction lamp plugged into a generator, its harsh beam illuminating a cleared space in the center. 2 men stood there. One was large, built like a brick wall, arms crossed. A silent sentinel. The other was smaller, slimmer, in a dark overcoat. He had a lean, intelligent face. He was the voice on the phone. "Leo," he said, smiling. It didn't reach his eyes. "You came alone, wise." "Where's Clara?" I asked, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Not part of this discussion. She's moved on. You should too. Do you have it?" I held up the duffel bag. "It's here. All of it. The drive, the passport copies, everything." "How do I know you won't set me up anyway?" The man sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Because, Leo, you are insignificant. A loose end. Tying you up neatly is our preference. Creating a messy public trial with you as a centerpiece is a nuisance. We prefer neatness. Give us the data, sign a prepared confession stating you attempted to blackmail Chloe Marsh with these materials, and we part ways. The confession is insurance. It stays in a vault. Unless you ever speak of this again, Then it becomes public, and you go to jail for attempted extortion. A simple, clean mechanism. A confession. Of course, they wanted my signature on my own damnation, to hold in reserve. The elegance was breathtaking. The big man stepped forward, hand out for the bag. I hesitated, playing my part, the scared man making one last futile stand. "I need a guarantee," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to know this ends." The man in the overcoat chuckled. "There are no guarantees, Leo. Only consequences and choices. You made your choice when you opened that box. Now you live with the better of two bad options. Hand it over." I looked from him to the enforcer. I let my shoulders slump in defeat. I handed the duffel bag to the big man. He took it, opened it, pulled out the fake USB drive. He handed it to the other man, who produced a slim laptop from a case. He plugged in the drive, scanned the contents. It was, of course, empty. His head snapped up. The pleasant mask vanished, replaced by cold surgical anger. "This is empty." "I know," I said. And for the first time, I looked directly at him, and I didn't try to hide the sharp, cold thing that had grown inside me. "The real data is somewhere else, somewhere safe, and it's attached to a trigger." I told them. Not everything. Just enough. I told them about the dead man's switch, that if I was arrested or if a story painting me as a criminal broke, the entire archive, with the high-end clients, the locations, the faces that were meant to stay blurred, would go to my lawyer and the press. I didn't mention the news outlets. Let them think it was just a lawyer. A contained problem. "You're bluffing," the man in the overcoat said, but his certainty was fraying. "Test it," I said, spreading my hands. "Have him break my arm. Have him put a gun to my head. The trigger isn't my heartbeat. It's my arrest. It's my public ruin. You want to ruin me? Go ahead. But the explosion will take a lot of your discreet clients with it. Is cleaning up my loose end worth that much collateral damage?" Silence. The big man looked at his boss. The generator hummed. I could smell the river, cold and dank. The man in the overcoat stared at me, reassessing. I was no longer the predictable engineer. I was an unpredictable variable, a failed component that had just sparked and threatened to catch the whole machine on fire. "You've made a very stupid mistake," he said softly. "I opened a lockbox 7 years too late," I replied. "Everything since has just been living with that mistake. This is me living with it. You can have the silence you bought from Clara. You can have my continued insignificance. But you don't get to frame me. You don't get to own me. That data is my insurance policy, and I'm keeping it." He closed the laptop with a sharp click. The sound was like a gavel. He studied me for a long, long minute. I held his gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. I was gambling with my life, and I knew it. Finally, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "The confession is off the table. For now, you will never speak of this. To anyone, you will live your small, quiet, broken life. You will consider yourself lucky, and you will pray that we never have reason to believe your insurance policy is anything more than a pathetic bluff." He turned and walked towards the dark mouth of the warehouse. The big man threw my empty duffel bag at my feet, then followed. Their footsteps faded into the darkness. The construction lamp stayed on, leaving me alone in its pitiless circle of light. I didn't move until I heard the distant sound of car engines starting and driving away. Then my legs gave out. I sat down hard on the cold, filthy concrete. I shook uncontrollably, the adrenaline crashing, leaving me empty and spent. I had faced them down, and I had survived. But it wasn't a victory. It was a stalemate brokered on a knife's edge. I had traded the threat of prison for a life of perpetual low-grade threat. The sword wouldn't fall, but it would always be hanging there, suspended by a thread of their continued belief in my dead man's switch. I would have to be quiet, forever. I would have to be small. I would have to live with the monster in the dark, knowing it was always just a breath away. I got up, eventually. I walked back to my car through the sleeping city. I went to my beige apartment. I sat in the dark. The next morning, I resigned from my job. I told them I needed a fresh start, away from the memories. They understood. I used the divorce money to buy a small, remote cabin in a state I'd never visited before. I told no one where I was going. I left no forwarding address. I became a ghost in truth. Now, I live in the woods. I do freelance drafting work online under a pseudonym. The silence here is different. It's not the oppressive silence of the condo. It's the silence of isolation, of chosen exile. Sometimes, on clear nights, I look at the stars and I wonder if she's looking at them too, from some penthouse or yacht, living her real life, funded by her real work. I wonder if she ever thinks of me, or if I was just a set piece that got packed away. The terror has faded into a constant watchful hum. I check the dead man switch every month. It's still there, dormant. My lockbox in a warehouse, my confession in a text file. My only power. I don't build bridges anymore. I understand now that the most important structures are the ones you can't see. The frameworks of lies, the architectures of secrets, the fragile invisible beams of leverage that keep the whole damned world from collapsing in on you. My life is a different kind of engineering now. It's the engineering of survival. I calculate stress tolerances for my own sanity. I reinforce the walls of my solitude. I bear the load. And the load is this. I am free, but I will never be free of her. Clara is gone. Chloe is out there. And I am here, in the quiet, with the blueprints of my own ruin forever etched behind my eyes. The marriage was a fiction, the love was a prop, and the divorce was just the first act of a play that never really ends. The final curtain never falls. You just learn to stand in the wings, forever, listening to the echo of a laugh that was never meant for you. Asterisk, I am an engineer, and I am built, now, to bear an infinite weight.